Hi everybody. You should hopefully be able to see me now. As long as this is all working okay. Hopefully you can hear me as well. Just unmuted the microphone. Thanks for the note that I'd left it on while we had the starting soon message. Now just let me know if you could please in the chat if you can see me okay and if you can hear me okay. Angelina can see me, thank you. Can see and hear, brilliant, thank you. Loud and clear, all working, okay. Looks like it started with a bit less fuss than usual this time. So let's get going. Talking about color today. And the reason I want to do a webinar that's focused just on this is because mostly because I get quite a bit of email about color, and I know it's something that a lot of people struggle with. And I certainly struggled with it for a very long time. And I managed to find a way to practice color, to get it more accurate. And the kind of the idea underpinning the webinar today is I'm going to show you some exercises that you can use to practice color too, so that you can get your colors a little bit more accurate as you paint. But they're just exercises. This is not finished paintings. But they actually, you can produce some quite nice studies this way, I think. But then through doing these kind of exercises, you develop your sensitivity to color, your understanding of color, and then that translates naturally into the paintings that you do. I remember the first experience I had with color and oil paints was a pretty horrendous one. I think I was about 12 years old, something like that. And I was kind of the arty one in the family back then, you know, and my mum got me some oil paints. And I was fascinated, you know, I'd never seen anything like it. What's this oil paint thing? Wow, I felt all grown up, you know. So I squeezed out some of these paints and I attempted to do a painting, to copy a picture of a bird. I think it was an eagle. It was an eagle. So I had various shades of brown and some black and white and stuff like this. Opened the tube, squeezed some out, and the smell hit me, and instantly I was hooked. The smell of oil paint was wonderful, you know, and funny enough, I still feel like that about it today. And of course, I made a horrendous mess because I had no idea what I was doing at all. I just mixed the paints together, expecting that colors would come out, and what I got was mud, which I think is the experience that a lot of people have when they first start out with this kind of thing. And even after that point, I still struggled with color for a very long time. And I mentioned in the values webinar last week that I was introduced to Munsell by a painter called Graydon Parrish some time ago. And after I'd done a lot of work with values, I went on to color. And I also did a lot of work with Munsell with that. If you've seen the blog post from this week, which went up on Tuesday or yesterday, I think went up yesterday. And if you haven't seen the blog, it's learningtosee.co.uk. So if you've seen the blog post, you'll have seen a few pictures of cubes and spheres painted various local colors. Excuse me, still got my cold a bit. And me doing studies of them. And this is the stuff that really unlocked my palette. And it was through that practice that I really started to understand color, to get a better idea of how I could translate what I was seeing onto the canvas and get closer to the colors I saw, which I'd really struggled with up to that point. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides now. I quite enjoy doing this because it allows me to show you something of the process that I went through. I like to show the old stuff when I was really struggling and wasn't doing very good work, because I think I wish artists would do it more. It's actually on Facebook the other day I saw. I don't know if you've come across a very fine painter and teacher called Sadie Valeri, and she showed one of her new pieces, and she showed one of her pieces from years ago when she just started learning. And I love it when people do that, because there was this huge development from the first painting to the last one. And you could see the huge amount of learning that had gone on, but also it proves once and for all those kind of things. When people show them, it proves to people once and for all, especially people who are struggling like I was a while ago, to be fair, still do sometimes, but was struggling more before, that with practice you can improve beyond your wildest dreams. And when you're deep in that frustration and you really can't, you're trying to paint something that looks real and you just can't get there, those kind of things really help. So let's have a go, see if I can show you take you through some slides now, okay? So what you should have now is a particularly awful painting of a cantaloupe melon showing up on your screen. And this is from, now when is this from? About 2006, I think, something like that. And I'd been away from painting for quite a long time, and then I decided I was going to return to painting. And this is one of the first paintings that I did. And it has a lot of the common errors that you see in beginners paintings. The funny thing is I actually considered myself to be a reasonable artist at that point. I could draw reasonably well, and I'd done a lot of painting before, but I came back to try and paint stuff that looked real and discovered that I couldn't do it. So the stuff that's wrong with this painting, I mean, the colors are all over the place. The melon, sorry, is actually sitting on the floor, and those are floorboards, but the chroma is way too high, which is a really common beginner error. You get out your tube paints, we've got all of these lovely cadmiums these days, and you end up with a color that's way too bright. The other thing is that I tried to be very clever and do some kind of, I don't know what I was doing, some kind of technique with the reflected light and the shadow, and I massively overstated it on the shadow plane of the melon. And that's something that you also see happens an awful lot. Let me just, hopefully I can just get onto the next slide. Okay, so here's another one, and I popped this one in. This is from about the same time. I popped this one in because I thought it was quite interesting, because I actually managed to do not too bad a job on this one for the time on the leaves, but if you look at the painting of the rose, the flower itself, it's just not there. It doesn't live, it's flat, the colors are wrong, the values are wrong. It's really not working at all. Through practice, I started to make some improvements. I did an awful lot of simple still life paintings like this, but still this one, I mean, you can see particularly around the stem of the pepper, it shouts to me now, now that I'm a bit further down the road, is that the values are really out. And also the chroma of the pepper is probably too high, and it's just too uniform all the way along. I did start to make some improvements, but it was such a struggle, and it took me so long. One of the things that I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do through this webinar, and maybe some more on this subject, is to shortcut for other people who are in the same position that I was in then, when I was struggling to get to paint something. I just wanted to paint something that looked real. You know, I wanted to do a good painting that I could be proud of. I'm going to try and hopefully try and shortcut that process and get you there quicker. And the way that I think you can do that is by practicing getting stuff right. That's the idea behind this, the exercises that I'm going to give you. Because if you continually practice, but every time you try to judge a color, you get it wrong, you're left floundering, and it's going to take you a really long time to get any better. I mentioned this in the blog post. It's like say a musician who's practicing with a really bad hand position or something like that. A dancer who practices with a bad posture. What you do is you encode failure. You get used to doing things wrong, and what you need is to see something right. You need to be able to create a form that lives on the canvas, to mix the colors and then be right, and that's going to show you something. You're going to learn an awful lot more if you can get something right. I think there's a kind of almost a fashion for saying you have to fail at something a lot of times before you get it right, but practice is a little bit different. You really want to practice getting things right. This is a little bit better than the stuff before, but there's still quite a few problems with it. The values particularly are pretty badly out on this one, especially on the grapefruit. It's far too uniform right across the form. I popped this one in because I'm actually going to paint a pear today, and that is a conference pear, and I'm going to paint a conference pear. I think at this point I was starting to get a little bit better. This is still 2006, I think, and I'd painted quite a lot of these little paintings then. And I was messing about with stuff like trying to paint translucent shadows and stuff like this, and trying to mess about with technique. And really, I hadn't even got the basics right yet. I hadn't even got the basics of color right yet. So I started practicing with Munsell. After I'd done all of that value practice that you saw last week in last week's webinar, I got a bunch of cubes, I got a bunch of spheres. This is again on the advice of Graydon Parish. Painted them lots of different local colors. Now all of these spheres here are of the same hue and the same value, but different chroma. So I painted a bunch of stuff up like this, and I did little studies of them. And I used the color checker, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today as well, to kind of to get a better handle on the colors that I was seeing, to get closer to them. And it did help me. And gradually I got away from the cubes and spheres, and I started to paint real objects again, but still in a neutral shadow box, trying to use the same techniques of the color checker and using Munsell. And things started to improve. Things started to look a little bit better. I painted a bunch of little studies like this, and bit by bit, things started coming to life a little bit more. Then I took that into trying to do paintings again, and they were better than the paintings I was doing previously. Still had a long way to go, but I was actually doing an awful lot better in the balance of the values and the colors that I was using. Carried on practicing, kept on working, and gradually the improvements started to come, because at this point, this is where I think the quality of my work kind of took a steep climb upwards, and my learning was much quicker because I was practicing getting things right much more often. This one is from, actually I forget when I did this one, but it's sometime after the iron painting. This was done quite extensively using Munsell to try and check the colors and get them right, which brings you pretty much up to, this one was done from just before Christmas. And I put this one in because it's another flower painting. And I tend to I do less of the color checking and the Munsell stuff these days. And I do a little bit more by eye, but that's only because I've had a certain amount of practice. But what I'm hoping that those few slides will be able to show you is that with practice, if you have a way into color, you can actually get color a lot more right, and it will help you make more progress much more quickly. So actually, I'm going to try something new in this webinar today. A few people were saying in the last webinar, and I think maybe the one before that, that it would be really cool if you could see the palette whilst I'm working. So I've actually got 3 cameras set up today. So I'm probably going to just trip over a lead and, bring the national grid down, and the webinar will end halfway through, but we'll see how we go. So I've got one camera focused on the palette, one camera focused on this behind me. This is the pear I'm going to paint. I've already started roughing it out a little bit there to save time. Obviously this camera, so I can talk to you a little bit, and I can switch, hopefully, if it works, between the camera that's focused over here on the easel and the camera that's focused down there, which you can't see at the moment, which is the palette. So the first thing I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to have a go at matching a local color, and I'm going to show you a way that you can go about matching local colors. Now, I think matching local colors is outrageously good practice if you struggle with color. Now, what I mean by matching the local is the color that something is, regardless of the light that's falling on it, in just an even light. So if I was going to paint this, something the same colors as this pear, like say a cube, those would be the local colors. Now the pear is interesting, conference pear, because it actually has 2 local colors, a bright kind of higher chroma green, and then this color, which you'd probably think was green too, right? Actually, it's yellow. And the reason I know that is because obviously I've been messing about with this little pear, actually with that little pear there, which is slightly different than this one. But here's a page from the Munsell Big Color Book, okay? Now this is, what's this one? 5Y, so it's like middle, kind of middle yellow. And you can see all of these are the same hue, just the same as those spheres that I showed you in the slides earlier on. So this goes from dark to light, from grey to high chroma, but they're all the same hue. And actually, this bit of this pair is probably out there. Not far off. Perhaps there. Perhaps somewhere in between the two. But it's actually, I mean, yellows look very green when they get down into the lower values and the lower chromas anyway. So, but ordinarily, I mean, you'd think, this is where your thinking gets in the way. You'd think, oh, it's a green pair. I'll get some green paint out and I'll paint that. But when I mixed up the color for this earlier on, because I've got some colors ready already to paint, it was almost, I mixed that color almost entirely with some green, but mostly with cadmium yellow, raw umber, and some gray to knock the chroma back. So that's actually what I'm going to do. Well, that's what I'm going to start with, is I'm going to take you through, hopefully, if the palette cam works, I'm going to take you through matching a local of this pair and doing it like this, using the little color checker. I should really get a new one. This one's got paint all over it. I mean, they're really simple to make. Isolate a little part of the color like that. Okay. And then I'm going to get, this is a little, if I can get the light reflecting on that, hopefully you can see it. It's a little strip of clear acetate. This is for, you get these in A4 size from office supply shops. And it's just for OHP slides, you know, but they're really handy. You can just cut off a little bit of it. Sorry, a bit distracted by the cat. Last week he was sick. I don't know if anyone here was in last week's webinar. I'm hoping he's all right today and he's going to behave himself. Looks like he wants out though. We'll see what happens. You can put a little bit of paint on there, hold it up against the color checker like that, and kind of check it against the rough average, and then use that to mix your color. What I would often do, because I've got the Munsell tags, is to pick out, is to judge with these Munsell tags which is the closest. So you can do it. Can I do it? Hold them all at once? I could do it like this. Pick out a likely one, hold it up against the color like that, and then judge it. You can do this with the little ones in the student book as well. And then you can take this over to your easel and match it. And it's handy because you can you can actually dab the color on there that you're mixing to check, and you can get really close that way. But you don't need this to do it. You can do it. And I'm going to do it without them just now, just with the little, if I haven't just lost it, the little acetate strip. Okay. So hopefully that will make some sense. After I've matched the local, I'm doing that because I want to show you, excuse me, an approach to mixing color first. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to here. I'm going to paint the study of this pair. Now I'm not going to paint the cube. What I've done with the cube is I've picked an average of the two different local colors, the higher chroma green and this yellowish gray color that the rest of the pair is. And I've painted them onto a cube. And that's really handy because it means, again, with my little bit of acetate, I can put swatches on here of the colors that I'm painting and mixing, and I can hold them up against here, sorry, against the cube, and check how close I am. Now I can do that on the pair as well, but the reason I've done the cube is because a cube has a flat surface, so it's much easier to judge, because obviously the pair is a rounded shape, so the locals are changing all the way across the form. And the colors of the cube, getting the colors of the three faces of the cube that way will help with painting the pair, but it won't do it for you, but it puts you in the right ballpark. So if you mix those colors well, the ones that you perceive, and you manage to judge them fairly accurately and mix and match them fairly closely, you'll be getting color right, and they'll put you in the right ballpark of the pair. So you won't have a wildly wrong hue. You'll be somewhere close on the values and somewhere close on the chroma, so that when you work in sight size like this, the direct comparison you have between the painting and the subject helps you to get the last little bit of the distance by yourself, by eye. And that last little bit of practice by eye, of judging by eye, I think is really useful, because that's the bit when you really start to stretch your ability to judge color. And it's a little bit like measuring in drawing. If you're trying to measure, if you're trying to judge the distance between 2 points that are very far apart, like the top of someone's head and the bottom of their feet, the margin of error is high. But if you're trying to judge the distance between 2 points and they're quite close together, it's a small distance, the margin of error is much lower. And I think it's like that with judging color as well. If you're close, through direct comparison, you can get much closer. You can practice getting it right. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. One of the difficulties for me when I'm doing these webinars is that, excuse me, sorry, it's very difficult for me to follow the chat at the same time. I went out of focus, did I? Have we got a bit of a problem? Are we still here? If you could just say quickly in the chat if there's a problem, or if you're it looks like we're okay. Yeah, it will go out of focus, I think, every now and again, and that might happen on the other camera too. But we'll just everybody's saying it's fine. Okay, that's good. Let's keep going. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move my stool over to the other side of the room. I say room, it's actually, this is a really small room that I do these webinars in, and I'm completely surrounded. It's like being in an airplane cockpit or something. I'm completely surrounded by wires and cameras and stuff now, so I'm actually only moving a couple of feet that way. But let's just see. I'm going to try and switch over to the camera that's on the palette. Okay, so this is the camera that's on the easel, so I ought to be able to switch now if everything works all right. Yes, we've got the palette. Now this camera unfortunately isn't quite as good as the other camera, so the picture's not as good. I thought it was better to keep the best camera for the shot of the easel, because that's the most interesting bit. But what I'm going to hopefully be able to do for you now is take you through matching this local here. So first I need to choose, here's my little tag. First I need to choose, excuse me, which bit of this pair I'm going to try and match. Let's say I'll go for that bit there, okay? Pop that down there. You can see, by the way, actually, before I go any further, you're probably wondering about what I've got on my palette here. So let me tell you a little bit about this. I've already done a bunch of color mixing and matching using the color checker and the Munsell chips for the cube and the pear. Excuse me. So this is broadly, these colors over here are broadly the higher chroma areas, and these are the lower chroma areas. This pair is actually slightly more yellow than the one I'm going to paint. It's slightly different, and of course there's variation across the surface, but these get me in the general area. So from light towards dark, I've got the yellowish color, and then from light towards dark over here, I've got some pre-prepared colors for the higher chroma greenish color. And you notice I have very few paints out here on the palette. I've got white, I've got a few neutrals here. This is black. These are actually Munsell neutrals, but I haven't got a full range. I've just got really what I thought I might need. So that's black, and then I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, and that one's 8. And then over here, notice how all I've got out here is the colors that I need to mix the colors of this pair. So I've got cadmium yellow. This is Winsor & Newton sap green, which is quite a nice color because it's low value but high chroma, which is quite difficult to find in greens. I've got raw umber, which is mainly just for in case I need that for the background, and burnt umber. And all of the colors here that I've mixed for the pair, I've got out of these three: burnt umber, sap green, cadmium yellow, and white. 4. But hopefully that's a bit of an explanation about the palette. So let's say I want to match. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to have to let the cat out, or he's going to scrabble there for a little while. Sorry about that. I'll give him 5 minutes and he'll probably want to be back again. So the Munsell book has already showed me that this is actually a yellow much more than it's a green. So if I just pick up some burnt umber, and some yellow, it's probably going to get me somewhere near. Let's see what I end up with. Already I can see it's getting me fairly near. Interestingly, I've got burnt umber is an orangey yellow in terms of hue, and cadmium yellow. So really I've got 2 yellows here, but what I've ended up with is this kind of olive green, because the yellows do go very green when you get into the lower values. Now this is obviously at the moment, the value is much too low, so I'll put a bit more yellow in to bring up the value. That will also, apart from swinging it more heavily towards yellow, towards the hue, it will also bring up the chroma. So I know I'm going to have to knock the chroma back at some point. But what I really want to be going for first is about the right value. I'll just do a really quick check. I think the value is fairly close. So what I'll do now is get a little bit of this. Spread it onto the little strip like butter. So what I've effectively done is kind of made my own little Munsell chip here. Then I can hold it against the color checker and see. Value is not bad. It's maybe a little bit too low. It needs to be lighter. And also the chroma is definitely too high. So I'm going to bring it up a little bit with white. Bring up the value. Sorry, I'll bring up the value a little bit with white. Now that will have the effect of bringing the chroma down, because this is titanium white, which is a kind of a bluish hue. But I'm still hunting for the value. I want to get the value right first. Generally speaking, I find value is the most important part of color. And if you can get the value right, the chroma and the hue are easier to judge. I'm not sure. I wish I could zoom in on this, but I have a feeling I'll really throw out the focus if I do. Maybe I should try and set up a webinar just on color mixing that I can zoom right in on. I think I might have just blown the value and gone too high now, but let's have a look and see. Need to wipe this off. Spread a bit of jam on there. I think the value might have gone a bit too high. It's also because I've got those little flecks of green in there. I think generally, yeah, the value has gone too high. And I think I might want to bring the hue just a little bit round to green, just a tiny bit from there. So let's bring the value down a bit first to where I think it should be. It's not very much. It's when you get to this point, when you're doing very fine adjustments, I think this is when you really stretch your sensitivity. You develop your sensitivity to color. All learning is building connections between neurons in your brain. So the more you do this kind of thing, the more you're building connections. Okay, so I think that's probably about right value-wise, but it's gone a little bit too yellowy, and it wants some green. Now, what I'm going to show you now is a way of pulling the hue without affecting the value. So I know I want to add a little bit more green. Okay, so I'm going to pick up some of this sap green, and I'm going to mix that just with white up to the value I need it to be. So it's about the same value. Whoa, way too much white. So hopefully that should be get that out of the way. That should be getting towards the same value. It's quite chromatic, and it has a marked green hue compared to the other one. Obviously way too green. Let's pop a little bit on the strip and check it for value. I think it's too light. I find this much easier to do in daylight. I've got two separate lights at the moment set up, and I haven't tried mixing color under these lights before, but hopefully you can get an idea of the process that you can go through. The whole reason I'm doing this is so that I get something of the right value. That's about the right value, I think. So I just want to swing this color around the color wheel. At the moment it's very yellow, and I want to add just a tiny bit of more green to it. But if I just went ahead and banged in some of that sap green, I would also affect the value, and I'd throw out all of that work that I've just done trying to get that one close. What I've now got is two colors of the same value at different points of the color wheel. So if I take some of that and I mix probably just a really small amount of that in with it, I can swing the hue around maybe a little bit more without affecting the value. And this is something called Graydon Parrish told me about this method of matching a color as well, and he calls it bracketing, and I think he learned it from his teacher Michael Aviano, and it's a brilliant way to control color very carefully. And of course, all the time you're doing this, you're judging and comparing. So it's really good color practice, although it may seem like all you're doing is just messing. You're not actually painting. That's closer. It's closer, but I think the value is still a little bit high. So I'm going to add a little bit more. Burnt umber. Now that is going to swing the hue a little bit, but probably not too much. If I wanted to be really careful about it. Difficult to judge in this light because I can't seem to get it without a shadow. because I've got two lights on opposite sides of it. But I think I'm fairly close there, but I think the chroma is too high. I think the hue is about right, and the value is about right, but the chroma is a little bit too high, meaning that the colour's a bit too bright, it's too rich. So I want to pull it back towards grey if I can, without affecting the value. So if you like using Munsell chips for this, you can just, if you're matching Munsell chip, you can just turn it over and see what value it is. And if you've got all of your values mixed up ready, then you can just pick up the right one without having to think about it. But actually, I'm not using a chip, so I've got to judge it. And I think it's around a 5, about in the mid-range. So I'm going to pick up some of that. I'll leave a little bit aside because I might, if I put too much grey in, I might need to pull it back again. Drop the chroma a little bit. So this is basically the Munsell. I've gone too far. This is basically the Munsell way of approaching colours, conceptualizing colour. It's having 3 coordinates: the value, the hue, and the chroma. And of those for painting, but the value is the most important. A bit more jam on there. It's actually, I think it's still too light. I think the chroma is much closer now. But it's the value is still too light. I must admit I'm struggling a bit with these lights. And I've probably gone way too far there. But hopefully what I'm doing is enough to show you a way that you can, it's pretty close, a way that you can approach mixing colour. This is an exercise. It's I think it's actually worth doing if you're doing painting, certainly if you're doing the little kind of studies that I'm going to do one of it shortly to demonstrate for you. But this is a brilliant exercise for developing a sensitivity to colour. Somewhere near, I think. Probably a little bit light. I could go on for some time making small adjustments to that. But a couple of things that I really want you to notice about this is, firstly, that I've used really, I did most of it with 2 colours and white. I thought it was a green. If you look at it, you'd say it was a green, but it's actually yellow. There's a little bit of green. So the way that I introduced a bit of green, a bit of hue, green hue, was to mix up the green of the same value and then to mix the 2 together. So I kind of inch it around the color wheel a little bit towards green in a very controlled way without changing the value of the color. And that's exactly how I mixed up all of the other colors that I've got here. Obviously this pair it's a different pair than the one I've done my judging and mixing on so far. But the process of using the color checker with a little strip like that is almost the same when you're doing it actually on the painting itself. So let's see if I can, if the technology is going to be kind, I can switch to the other camera. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to pick up one of the colors that I've mixed earlier on. And pop it onto the tag just as I did then. I'm going to show you how you can use the color checker like this. If you want to, it's incredibly difficult for me to line up because I have to look at the screen instead of what I'm doing, because the camera's point of view is ever so slightly different from mine. Now, a couple of things about, obviously I've already done some of this, so that colour's pretty close to the light part of this cube here to that plane there. But it's really, really important that you hold this colour checker level with your paint surface. I've previously made sure that I have a similar amount of light falling here that I have on the subject there, and you've got to hold it at the same angle, because if I tip it that way, there's more light falling on it, so it no longer matches. If I tip it that way, eventually it gets darker. There's less light falling on it, so it doesn't match. So if you don't hold this level, it can actually tell you lies. So you've got to be really careful about how you use these little tools. But that's basically how you can. Sorry, I've just got right in front of the camera there. I'm just going to pop back onto the main camera for a second. How you can go about judging and mixing colours. Now, the first bit of that, the exercise is really simply just trying to isolate a little bit of the pear and mix the colour. I could have easily have done it with the higher chroma bit up here, or with anything else. I mean, you can do that with anything. Book covers are really great to do that. Anything like that is really useful. So, does anyone have any questions up to this point about what I've been doing so far? And I'll just have a quick look in the chat and see. A few people talking about light there. Yeah, color corrected fluorescent light about 5500K light daylight. That's what I've got here. Actually, I'm just trying out some new bulbs in my main light over here at the moment. And it's actually burning quite hot, but so I'm hoping it's not going to blow up, but I think it'll be all right. And they are 5500K. So very cool light, somewhat like daylight. I've got 4 of them, and they're about 45 watts, but they're those energy savers. So I'm not sure what the equivalent is. But the CRI is just over 90, and that's why I changed them, because the bulbs that I was using before were CRI of only 80. Okay, someone's asked, what kind of material do you use for the colour finder, matte plastic or paper? This, if you mean this bit, the colour checker, it's just a bit of card. I think that's the back of a sketch pad. This is just a bit of craft card. Grey ones are probably better actually, but to be honest, I found in practice the black one works almost as well. If you meant the little acetate strip, this little thing here, that is, well, it's a little acetate strip. It's from, if you get they call them OHP slides, I think, and you can get them from office shops, and they cost next to nothing, you know. Is Munsell the only way to do it? No, Munsell isn't the only way to do it. You can just if you can use these tools without using Munsell, and you don't need the Munsell book, and you don't need the tags to do it. But I think it will really help you if you think in terms of value first, and then chroma, and then hue, or hue and then chroma. Personally, I like to go with chroma and then hue. If you're if you're trying to mix colors, it just gives you a much easier way into color. Someone's saying, I have the student book with the black cover. Is that the same as the book above? No, it's not the same, but it's still useful. Here's the student one. Okay, so if you see, that's 5R, which is like a medium red. So that goes from value 2.5 up to value 8, and the chroma goes up to 14. These are matte printed chips, so it's a little bit more limited what they can do with them. And this is the big book, and it comes in 2 volumes. This is quite an old edition. They probably have a newer one out now. So here's 5R, and actually the chroma still only goes up to 14, but the value goes up there, up to 9 and down to 2. So it has a little bit more range. It's horrendously expensive. And you don't actually need, excuse me, either of them to do this, but I would suggest that getting hold of at least the student book would be a really good investment, because it was part of the kit that helped me get a much better handle on colour. Have I ever tried these methods with landscapes? No. The way I would approach that is to do these, excuse me, to do these small studies indoors, to build your sensitivity to colour, and then that should translate into better paintings when you're outside. I believe you could do it. I've got a book by Kevin Macpherson somewhere, and he's got a little colour checker like this. But unfortunately, at no point does he tell you that you've got to be really careful about the angle that you hold it. And, you know, it's not going to be terribly useful if you don't do that. Do you always lower chroma using grey? Yes, always. These are Munsell neutrals. They do occasionally swing the hue a little bit towards yellow. But the advantage is that you can get exactly the right value and then just drop the chroma down. Okay. So that we don't go on too long, I've still got a painting to do. We're 45 minutes in already. So what I'm going to do now is hopefully to start showing you how having some of those colours together already mixed can help with actually putting together a study. Now, if you've been in any of the other webinars, the last two webinars that I gave, you'll be familiar with the basic method that I use to build up these studies. I'm not going to bother painting the cube on this one. I've just used the cube in order to give me excuse me, a way in to get close to the colours of the actual pen. So what I need to do first is to get some background in there, just so I've got something to work with. Of course, I'm painting on a white surface. Toned grounds are fine, and to be honest, I do usually use them. But for these studies, I tend to just use these little canvas pads. They're just cheap, you know. And all right. The surface isn't the nicest to paint on, but it does the job. Now, if I look with my color checker, actually, interestingly, if I looked with my color checker across the area of the background over here, it would probably look darker than this. The darkest that I can get over here is I've got a mixture of burnt umber with a little bit of black in it here, and I'm just kind of scumbling it in. It's probably going to be about value 1. And I suspect that if I got my color checker out, it would appear a little lower than that. But I do these studies in a very systematic way, always in the same order. Again, you don't have to, but I think it's a very effective way to do them. And I got it from Howard Speed. So it starts by, I'm going to put some black in because it's just going to let me drop the value a little bit there. Starts by roughing in the background. Then you do the ground. Then the cast shadow, and then the object itself. So what I could do if I wanted to here at this point, and frequently would, if you have a value scale, again, you don't have to have the Munsell scale for this. This, however, is the sheet of value chips from the Munsell book. And this one over here is value 0.5, which is about the lowest you can get in paint. Value 0 is theoretical and is no light at all. So if I hold that chip over an area of the background, it's kind of difficult to see on the camera, but the background still looks slightly darker than the chip. And I can scan across and see at which point it changes. But I've got somewhere close to the value. So what I will do at this point is I'll use that the ground that the pear is sitting on is pretty much a neutral grey. It's just paper, and the shadow box is also the background of the shadow box is also paper. I just stick it in with blue tack, so I can kind of scan across. Let me try and get this lined up so you can see it too. This is devilishly hard to do, so you see what I see, but that's obviously a little light, a little too light, and that was a value 6. Again, you don't have to have the Munsell chips for this. You can do a value scale, and you can scan values this way if you just paint a good value scale. That's 5. And it's much closer. It may be a little light, but I'm going to go in with 5 anyway, because interestingly, one of the things I found about this method is that sometimes I'll scan across a value, and this is why you still have to use your eyes, and I'll paint it in, and then I'll find that as I get further through the painting that it looks a little too dark and I have to lighten it. And I've come across this quite a few times. You may have heard me mention it before. And I have a feeling that part of the reason is that for these webinars, because it's late at night here, I'm doing them under artificial light, whereas normally I'd paint by daylight, and the drop off in artificial light is more steep. So say from here to there, the light drops off, which is why I have another light over there, which is on the easel as well, to bring a bit more light onto the easel. So you're holding the color checker up slightly closer to the light, so that it may be that there's a little bit more light falling on it. But let's see, when we get to the point of judging by eye, the reason I have the camera set up this way is that you ought to be able to judge pretty much along with me how accurate the values are and how close I managed to come with the color as we go along. I'm not going to paint the full thing. I just want to get some background and ground in. And this bit I'm going to do by eye, because I can see it's getting darker as it goes back there. Right down to the value of the background, if not a little darker. Now what I'm doing now as I'm painting is I'm just I've got one eye closed, and I'm just sighting across from one to the other. This area here is the cast shadow. I'm going to paint that in a bit. Always paint the ground first, the whole of the ground, including the areas in shadow, and then paint the cast shadow. And this kind of fairly systematic way of building up a little study like this is useful, because it means that you get the kind of the messy bits, like where you want to be blending your cast shadows and stuff, out of the way. You can paint the background kind of up to your blocking of your object, and a little bit over, if you like, so you don't get like a hard ridge of paint there. Again, this is something that I went over on a little on one of the other webinars, where you can kind of put your values in a very blocky way. Get a soft dry brush. This is a filbert, no paint on it. Match it over, rub off the paint, and just drag through. It's a kind of a quick, fairly easy way to do a gentle blend. See, already, I'm not going to change it yet, but already my comparison between the subject and the painting is suggesting to me that this area of the ground is too dark, wants to be lighter, but it's very hard to judge at this point until everything is at least blocked in. So I'm just using the color checker, the color isolator, to get me what I think is close. Block it all in and then see where I am. Now, a quick word about the chat, which I forgot to say. I always try and say this at the beginning of the webinar, but I forgot today. I can't answer questions as I go along, obviously, because I can't see the screen anymore now, which is a little odd for me, because it means if something goes wrong, I won't actually know. But if you have any questions about anything that I'm doing as I go through this, there'll be like a question and answer at the end of the webinar. So please make a note of them. If you can, and ask them at the end. So the next stage for this is to put in the cast shadow. I'm going to go straight in with a value 2. I'm painting fairly thinly at the moment. Most of the paint that I'm putting on has got a little dab of thinner in it. I say thinner so no one shouts at me for using terps, because I use terps, pure gum turpentine, which I absolutely love. And I know it's, you know, people say it's horrendous stuff, and I'm sure that's right. And I certainly wouldn't recommend it to people because of the health risks and everything. But I like the smell. What would be really great is if I could have like a split screen thing so that you could see what I'm up to on the palette and what I'm up to on the painting. Because of course, when you're painting, a lot of the work that you do, a lot of the painting that you do is done on the palette now, really. But at least you've seen the palette, so you know that what I have there is quite a lot of pre-mixed paint. So at the moment, I'm just picking up different values where I think I'm going to need them. And just kind of drawing them in, really. And once I've got the paint kind of roughed in, I'll blend the edges. And it's a good idea to do it at this point, because you have a lot more freedom to do blending and stuff without if I'd already painted the pear and I went in and tried to do some fancy blending on my cast shadow, like as not, I'd chuck something out on the pear and have to paint all that again, you know, which would be a bit of a nightmare. Okay. So in terms of general shape, I think I'm getting somewhere near on the cast shadow. In terms of the values, I think I'm somewhere near, although I just made a bit of a mistake then and got that way too light. And one thing to watch out for that I always try and remember to mention and have forgotten so far is that the angle that you see on the camera is slightly different than what I see as I'm painting, which is a brilliant excuse for if I paint something wrong. But it actually does mean that what I see is slightly different than what you see. The camera is about 6 inches to the side of my head. So now I'm going to get another little mongoose filbert, dry, nothing on it. And I'm going to do that same, let me neaten along a little, I'm going to do that same kind of blending thing. You do a bit of a hatch. And the wider you hatch, the more it softens the line, and then drag it through. So, without having to do a lot of laborious painting, I get a softer edge over here where the shadow is further away, and a slightly tighter edge here, which is about right now. I always think at this point you should start to get some kind of a feeling of light, and if it's not there at this point, then it's probably a good idea to have a look at the values and check. I guess this is really, I'm just pulling the paint around. This back edge here is softer edge than this one here, because that bit of that shadow starts further back. Okay, so at this point I think I've got enough in there. A reasonable impression. I'm going to do a bit of a correction though, because I should actually be much more down here. I've actually gone a little bit over the edge onto the inside of the drawing. So I can paint kind of over the shadow over the background, sorry, in the ground, as I come out, as I paint the object itself. Which I think it helps to actually, it makes it feel a little bit that it's in front of it too. And you paint it that way. I'm just trying to tidy up this shape here a little bit and to bring that value down, because it's going to help that edge of the pear there stand out if I get that a bit more right. But if I'm honest, I'm dodging myself a little bit because I really need to be getting onto the colour. So let's do that. Okay. So I'm going to pick up, if you're in any of the other webinars, I'm going to pick up 3 brushes to paint this pear with. They're all the same brush. They're Rosemary's brushes and they're long filberts mongoose. And I'll use one for the shadow area, one for the midtones and one for the lights. I may use maybe 1 or 2 other brushes too once I'm actually painting. But it helps to keep the colours a bit more separate, I think, if you're painting in this kind of way, using premixes. Now, although I do have quite a lot of paint already pre-mixed here, what I tend to do as I'm painting is I adjust them quite a bit, as I think I'm going to need to as I'm going along. I'm going to start off with The first of the local colours here is this kind of, this yellowy colour. Which looks like a green, but as we know now, we made it using almost entirely yellows. I'm just going to block that in. There's quite a bit of reflected light in there. I suspect it's coming off the cube, but I don't want to paint it yet. It's one of those things, as I was saying with that horrendous painting that I showed you earlier on of mine of the melon on the floor. It's really, really easy to overdo that stuff, and it's very common to see paintings with those reflected lights overstated, and it really does destroy the floor. Well, for the other part, for the other, the higher part of the pear, I've got the different local. I've got a different local up there. So again, I'm going to use three different brushes just for that bit. So I've got 3 for the lower part of the pear and 3 for the upper part of the pear. I hold them all like this next to the palette. So the shadow side first. I'm going to pick up one of the other greens from the palette, so I know that's a little out of focus, but I've been painting with these over here, with these ones, and now I'm going to start painting with these ones, so I'm going to be over here. Still painting pretty thinly as well at this point. There's a bit more chroma, of course. And this bit, and it's a green, not a yellow. Not putting in any reflected light yet. I just want to block in the main shapes first. A little dark, maybe. And it's one of the things about streams, if you get every little brush stroke right first time, then it's fine. But if you need to paint back into an area that you've already done, then of course you're going to be there's some paint already on the canvas. So say if you think about it in terms of value, if you have a value of 5 on the canvas and you want to move it up to a value 6, you can't just go and paint the value 6, because you'll get like a, I don't know, 5.5 or something, you know. So it really doesn't do all the work for you. You still have to actually paint. Over into the light. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm kind of mixing between the colours that I've already got on my palette. To hopefully judge reasonably closely what I've got, what I can see. I'm going to paint them. Although it's speckled, the pair, I'm going to start off by painting it pretty much in two very separate regions, which I can then, if I get far enough in the webinar, I can then change later and add a bit of that texture if there's time to get that far. But the main thing I'm trying to do at this point, and I'm doing this mostly by eye, is trying to judge the values, really, which area of the string I want to be in, whether I need to bring it up in value or down, whether I need to adjust what I've got on the brush or not. So I'm going to change over to the green. Don't know if you can hear that intermittent tapping. That's the same cat that always disturbs the webinar. We've got two of them, and he's got himself outside. And instead of coming in through the cat flap, what he does is he knocks on the door. He knocks on the letterbox. And let me in. It's quite interesting here because I've just put a little bit of green, of the higher chroma green in, and I can see that there's a value change between the two that I'm not getting between the yellowy one. So I'm going to bring that bit down a little bit in value. Which I think that was too much. It's fairly slow and painstaking, this approach. If I get it somewhere near right, I should find that what I end up with is fairly close. And we just need some adjustment. So I'm really just interpolating between those colors just to bring in. I think the half tone would be something like that there. Oh, we got battery problems. This happened last week as well. That does mean I'm going to have to stop just for a second. I've got a backup battery. It does mean I'm going to have to stop just for a second to change the battery in the camera. At least I've got this to a point where the foam is beginning to appear a little. Just let me put a little bit of something in between those two there. And we're starting to get some of the idea of the colour. I think that's on the actual pair. I'm going to have to stop just for a second. It won't take a minute just to swap the battery over in the camera. In the meantime, I'll switch over to another camera. Slightly different angle right now. Just a second. We're almost back up and running again. Sorry about that. Let's just see if we can get back to it now. All being well? Yeah. Okay, so I've almost got most of it covered now. There's a lot that I can see that I need to change, but I'm going to carry on until I've at least got all of a reasonable amount of the canvas covered, and there aren't any holes. what I'm trying to do now is just to kind of look at the overall form, mostly at the values that I'm getting in my painting, and kind of just doing a quick comparison between what I've got my painting and what I can see. I think it might be a bit unfortunate that I've got a second light which is giving a bit of reflection. I'm just looking at the camera angle, and I'm not seeing quite as much reflection myself as it looks like I can see with the camera. So I wonder if I might try turning off that second light, just so you can see a little bit better without so much reflection. The main thing that struck me at the moment is for the shadow side, I'm having to bring the values down quite a bit. And also to bring them across a little further. So a lot of the time I'm squinting. I'm trying to judge the values against what I can see. Let me just turn off this second light. And see if that cuts down. I think that should cut down the amount of reflected light on the painting. Yeah, I think that's better. Hopefully you can see a little bit more kind of what I'm seeing there. We're kind of already starting to get to a point where the form is starting to appear across both bits of the pear, and the colour is starting to look like it's reasonably close at this point. So a little cube has kind of helped us get closer to seeing the actual colours on the pear by simplifying. So when you actually come to paint, instead of having loads of different pigments on your palette that are probably not terribly closely related to what it is that you're seeing, you can have just what you need. I'm going to try adding in a couple more. to the detail where the darker value of the darker one of the two colours, it kind of mottles up a little into the other one. So I have to, if I'm on the shadow side, I have to use a different colour. I can't just use the same colour for that across the form. It has to be a different, it has to be the right value for the right part of the form, depending on its orientation to the light. There's actually a couple of little dabs of the green. The lighter, the greenish colour, going down onto the yellowish underneath. So I'll see if I can, just a little of that. That one got a bit lost, it's a little lighter. Now, obviously I'm not putting these in with great care, but this is where the ordinarily I would prefer to, but we're already we're just coming up to an hour and a half, which is usually when I stop painting. I would love to be able to do a little bit more on this because I don't feel I've really made enough progress on it yet. But hopefully you can see that the form is beginning to appear. And through carefully matching the local, excuse me, and then doing a little study first, which is the cube. It's allowed me to get a lot closer than if I'd just gone in and guessed. One thing I think I've pretty much, I can't resist doing is that little the stem. Okay, so I'm going to leave this little study there. As I say, as much as I would love to keep fiddling with it and working on it, I would probably, I guess, I'd maybe go for another hour, maybe, or something on something like this, I suppose. But in terms of the exercise, in a sense, it's done, because it's already been some fairly good practice with getting colour a little more right and a little less wrong, which is the point of the exercise for a little study like this. And if you paint a lot of these without being too precious about them, because it's not like you're trying to produce a finished painting every time you go in to do one of these. You're not going to try and sell it or put it on the wall. It's just an exercise. You're just doing it for what it will teach you about colour. These kind of little studies are really useful. I can just beg your indulgence a little bit more. There's just, you know, there are those bits in a painting that you just can't leave alone. I just want to put just a suggestion of the speckle, just because it looks so nice. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there from the point of view of painting. So what we can do now is I'll stay on for a little bit longer. Go back to the main camera. And if you've got any questions, if you can, hopefully if you can remember them, or if you manage to make a note of them or anything, then I'll do my best to answer them. I think I've got this little study at this point to a point where it's given me what I needed to get from it, which is it's let me get closer to the actual colours of this pair. I practiced getting colour a little more right. Rather than getting it wrong. How did I mix the highlight? Sorry, I'm just going to start looking through some of the questions now. The highlight was just mixed in with a little bit of titanium white with some of the colours that I already had out. If you're making shadows, right, someone just asked a question about making shadows. Do you use the darkest colour or black? Don't use black for shadows. Don't mix black into shadows unless you're painting a neutral object, because black is actually is really a kind of a blue colour. So what I've got here on my palette for mixing the darks for the shadow areas is around here. So I know, so for this bit here, the darker part of the pear, I know that it's a yellowish colour, so that I know that burnt umber is going to be quite close to that. So when I needed to go deeper, then I had a lower value into the shadow. I mixed in burnt umber. For this one, I can go with burnt umber as well, but it didn't really need to go that deep, and it has a little bit more chroma, so I can use a bit of that. You need to use a shadow colour that's related in hue to the colour, to the local colour that you're painting. That's what these strings can help you do. Can you leave the white of the canvas showing? I guess you could, but I don't think this is actually white. None of the highlights there are white. They're a little bit off-white, and the highlight will always have, or generally will have, a little bit of the color of the object in. So I wouldn't. How to get mixed paint into tubes to save it? I wish I could give you some tips on that. I get it everywhere when I do that, I'm afraid. I'm not particularly good at it myself, but so I got one here. I use these, and I scoop up the paint on the palette knife, drop it in, and then tap it repeatedly for a very long time on the surface until it's full enough, and then crimp it with pliers from the bottom up. We're not talking about using complements or anything like that. This is a very controlled method of painting, which is trying to help you get to the actual colors of shadows. Color is one of those things. I think I've seen more arguments about color on forums than I have anything else. It's just one of those things that it just really seems to get people's goat. And this exercise is a very simple one here. All I'm trying to do is to get as close as I can to the colors that I can see. And by matching the local first, that helps me see what pigment tube paints I need. It puts me in the right area. And then by doing a little study of a cube like this, that will teach you a little bit more as well. This is exactly the kind of study I'm talking about. So this is one, if I can get the light about right on it. I've got a cube, a sphere, and a lemon. So the cube and the sphere have been painted the same local as the lemon, and then all three have been set up in a shadow box like this and painted. It's essentially the same exercise, except that to make this one a little bit more interesting, I chose an object that has two different local colors. Perhaps I stretched it a little bit too far and I should have simplified it. What do you use to lighten the value? Is there a light yellow or both? Again, it depends on the color. You need to mix them really in steps for this kind of work. So you would judge what you needed, and then you would mix it, hold it up against what you needed, and see if that was right. It depends. If you just go in with white, then it might pull the hue. It will certainly drop the chroma. Yellow obviously might be the wrong hue for whatever color you're doing. So it depends very much on what you've got. Having done quite a bit of practice with Munsell chips like this and painting various cubes, what I tend to find is, say that was the local color somewhere around there, the chances are when you get up to the highlight it would be somewhere up around here, lower chroma, assuming we're talking about, you know, daylight and not a colored light. And then it would gradually go down here, and if it's a higher chroma local, it will tend to follow the outside edge until it gets down to the shadow about here. Now these colors down here still have a hue, not very much, but they do still have a hue. And one of the most interesting things I found by doing a lot of studies like this is that as long as there's no noticeable reflected light of a particular color, and as long as the color of the light is fairly neutral, what tends to happen is on an object of just one local color, so the color doesn't vary much, it will tend to stay the same hue. The shadow will be the same hue, and you could only find that out by using these little Munsell pages, you know. But it was one of the things that was a real eye-opener for me, and probably made the most difference to me starting to be able to paint stuff that looked a little bit more real, when I realized that as you go across the form from light to the middle, where about the local is, to shadow, the hue tends not to change, given a constant local. Now, you can try out all of that stuff, and I did for a long time, without the big Munsell book, just by using the small Munsell book, just by using this one. So you can paint, say, choose that as the local, and paint a cube or a cube and a sphere, that color, set it up in a shadow box like this, and then you can use these little tags with your color checker just as I was back then, to check the colours, to sight across. And I think you'll find if the lighting is reasonably controlled and there isn't a lot of bounced coloured reflected light, the hue will stay constant across the former. So you don't have to worry about what colour to use for the highlight or what colour to use for the shadow. It's not about whether you're using black, a complement, a yellow, or anything like that. You're matching the colours you see. Did you paint the pear? I'm not sure what you mean. Did I put some paint on the pear? The pear, I did actually. I won't be able to eat it. Just to see. Hue shift, does it happen only with reflected colour? It can happen with reflected colour, hue shift, or it can happen if there's a particular colour of the light. For instance, if you imagine if you're painting a red sphere and you have a very bluish light, and then as it moves into the light, it's probably going to change hue a little bit. So yes, it can happen, but under controlled conditions like this, you know, or if I was painting in daylight, especially on an overcast day, there wouldn't be any hue shift from light to shadow. Bear in mind that this is also in a shadow box, which really controls the light. So there isn't really any bounce light getting into the shadow box. How do you know you've mixed up enough colours for your painting? You don't really. I've actually mixed up a little bit too much here, so I've got some left to chuck away. I mean, those things just come with time. I wouldn't worry about that stuff too much. You know, just focus on the really big, important things. Focus on the 80-20 rule. Is as relevant for painting as anything else. If you focus on the 20% of things that are going to make 80% of the difference, get your values right, get your colors right, be able to draw out reasonably accurately, and be able to handle edges, and forget everything else. Honestly, forget about mediums, different paint techniques, whether you're painting glazing, translucent shadows, all that stuff. It's all brilliant, but you can do it further down the line once you've got the basics taken care of. You know, life is short and time is limited and painting is hard. So if you can focus on the 20% of things that are going to make the most difference to you being able to make progress and paint realistically, then do that. And I think those things are good drawing, good values, color, being able to paint reasonably true color, and being able to handle edges. And if you can do all of those four things, then you'll be able to paint reasonably realistic little studies, and it would get you over some of the humps. The course that I'm putting together, which is based on a lot of the stuff that I've been doing in these last few webinars, goes through those in stages. So it starts off with drawing, then it goes into values, and at each stage there are practice exercises to help you develop the skill, because just by watching something like this isn't going to make you any better a painter. What I'm trying to give you are exercises which you can take away and then drill, practice with, because you don't learn it until you've actually done it, until you've repeated it. I thought the shadow's color needed to be related to the background color. No, not unless it's reflected light. If it's reflected light, then yes, but otherwise it needs to belong. The shadow plane belongs to the object, not to the background. To make the picture more cohesive, then you're talking about different things really. You're talking about the style of painting. What I'm talking about here are very simple color studies, which are just about learning more about color. How do you make your cubes? Oh, I just get 2" by 2". They call it 2x2 from the timber merchants, pine or whatever it is. And then I chop off 2" lengths, paint it with, give it a coat or two of acrylic gesso, and then just paint the thing. This one, I only paint the bits I need. So I haven't painted that side of that one. It's just white. The four most important things that I think, in my opinion, drawing, being able to draw reasonably accurately, values, color, and edges. And I think people don't often put edges as a fundamental skill of drawing and painting, but I think it's really key. Am I a full-time painter? No, I'm not. At the moment, I split my time between, I actually do digital marketing, I do SEO, and I have a site called Creative Triggers, which is a membership site, which is, it kind of touches on some of this stuff, but it's slightly different really. It's more about drawing and from a kind of meditative point of view and self-development through drawing. And then I paint and I sell some paintings. And as I was just saying, I'm putting together a course at the moment, an online course, which is going to be my first online course. So we'll see how that goes. Yes, I'd add composition to that list. I'm glad you said that, actually. I would absolutely add composition to that list, but I would put it a little bit after those four. I mean, I'm talking about something very specific here. I'm talking about painting more realistically and getting color more right. If you're talking about creating art, then I would probably put composition first, if anything, which I know is not very fashionable to do. But if you find a book called Composition by Arthur Wesley Doe, he talks a lot about, it was written about the 1920s, I think, and he talks a lot about composition being something that you should start with, design. You should begin with making pictures and then do the drill for learning how to paint realistically afterwards. Exact yellow that you used today, the exact one. Michael Harding, cadmium yellow. Interestingly, I did some stuff with it, painting a lemon the other day, and you get your lemon yellow out, right? It wasn't lemon yellow at all. I actually needed this yellow, and I even needed to warm it up a little bit with orange, and it still looked like lemon yellow after I'd finished the painting. It's one of the nice things about working this way, and especially one of the nice things about Munsell, is it stops you relying on what your colors are called, and you just think about what you can create with them. Hopefully I haven't missed any questions. Do you use complementary colors for darkening a color? No, I think I've answered that one, hopefully, anyway. What is meant by the darkest dark in the light is always lighter than the lightest light in the darks? This is a bugbear of mine. I first came across that I think this comes from the Riley school, where they, from the Art Students League, where they said that you should always separate your lights and your darks, so that if you had, say, if you were painting, say you were painting a cube and it had a checkered surface, black and white, it would mean that the black bit on the light plane, let me grab a cube and show you what I mean. Paint all over my fingers, but never mind. So this bit is towards the light and this bit is towards the shadow, and imagine that this cube is checkerboard, black and white. The black here would always be lighter than the white there. Now, I'm very doubtful of that, because a lot of the value studies that I've done have frankly proved it to be wrong. It's perfectly possible for a black in the light to be darker. It may be something that people do in order to create a stronger value balance in the picture, perhaps, but it's certainly not a rule. And I personally think one of the things I love about this kind of practice is that you don't have to accept anybody's dogma, okay? You can get your brushes out, ask questions and answer them with your brushes and with your little color checker, and it works brilliantly for values as well. You don't have to accept anybody's idea about how you should do this stuff. You can find the answers to the questions yourself. Hopefully, are there any questions I've missed? Yeah, the composition book, it's called Composition, and it's by Arthur Wesley Doe, D-O-W, Doe. It's out of copyright, and you can download it for free if you search for it as a PDF, if you search for it on the internet. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, get a copy. How relevant to warm and cool color? To this kind of practice, not at all. Again, that's something that I think people talk about a lot with picture making. Harold Speed, in his book on painting, says that a lot of the strength of effect of color in pictures depends on the balance of warm and cool. Again, I think this is dogma, and I don't believe it for a moment. I've seen some very hot pictures that compose almost entirely of reds and yellows, and they work fine, and similarly very cool ones. I don't think any of that dogma should be taken literally. I can only reiterate, really get hold of some cubes and spheres and some objects. Get hold of a little color checker, especially do the value studies if you've seen the value webinar last week, and find answers to these questions yourself. You don't need to accept anybody's dogma about it, and generally speaking, I find it's wrong anyway. How do you keep such a clean palette? Is it clean? I don't know, maybe it is. When I finish it at the end, I always clean it really thoroughly and give it a wipe down with terps and then a little film of oil on the top. Is it the last webinar? No, it's not the last webinar. I'm going to do what? It's certainly not that. I'm going to do plenty more, hopefully. I'm certainly doing one next week on Thursday. And I think I'm going to have a bit of fun with that one, because what I want to do is to try and pull together the stuff that I've talked about in these last three and produce not exactly a finished still life, but a little bit closer than I managed to get on these. So I'm going to have to prepare quite a lot of it. And what I'm going to try and do, I think, I probably shouldn't say this because I might change your mind, but what I'm thinking about doing is to try and illustrate the fact that if you get your values right and your colors right, you can paint in any way you like, is to paint the same still life at the same time twice. Once kind of a little bit tighter and another very loose, more like, you know, I shouldn't really mention any painters' names or I'll get into trouble, but a more brushy version and a more finished, tighter version, to show that as long as you get the colors right, if you sort out this stuff through practice, then you have the freedom to paint in any way you like. Palette color does matter. I agree, it does. I always used to use glass palettes with grey paper underneath them. The only reason I haven't got one now is because my old one broke and haven't got another one yet. But after this, I will be doing more webinars as well as we go forward. One thing I've found is I really enjoy doing them. I hope you enjoy watching them. And now that I've started doing them, I've been having more and more ideas for ones that I think might be useful. I think it might actually be useful to do one just on color mixing one day. So we'll see. So there will be more. Do I mix my own black? No, I don't actually. I use Ivory Black. Michael Harding again. I generally use Michael Harding paints because they're really good quality. I like the feel of them and the pigment loading is high. Will it always be necessary to set up accurate lighting and do careful color checking, or is this an exercise to develop a sense of color? It's an exercise to develop a sense of color. You know, it's like sight size. If all you ever do is work sight size, what are you going to do if you how are you going to be able to do a sketch of someone who's moving a little bit? How are you going to be able to sit down and do a sketch of someone in a calf? Or like James Gurney had some stuff about painting, drawing in concerts lately. You know, if all you do is sight size, that's all you can do. But sight size is brilliant eye training. So it will help you sharpen the skills that you will use in other kinds of drawing. It's the same with this. All you're doing is developing, you're learning, you're developing a sense of color. You're building connections between neurons in your brain, developing your sensitivity so that when you go just to perform, just to paint, you'll be much better off. If you do enough of this stuff, the skills and the sensitivity eventually becomes automatic, and that frees up your brain processing power for other things whilst you're actually painting. There's a very big difference between what I'm doing here and actually producing and painting. All I'm doing now is I'm just practicing. It's just drill. You know, I'm just developing skills, which hopefully when I then go to paint again will come through in the work that I do. Could I do a webinar on edges? Yeah, okay. I'll do one on edges. Probably not next week, but before too long, yeah, edges, no problem. Very interesting subject. Webinar on edges, you got it. A couple of people asking for that. Oil painting grisaille. I don't do it. So honestly, if you want to find out about oil painting grisaille, look up Sadie Valeri because she's like the master. I don't work that way. I work in a very simple kind of alla prima way. Look up Sadie Valeri if you want to learn about painting grisaille. She has courses in it and she does incredibly beautiful work. Do you think you can paint without a model after a while and get good results? I think it depends what you want. I think it depends what you're looking for. If it's kind of comic art or stuff like that, then why not? I'm sure a lot of the time those people didn't have models. It's kind of, that's outside my remit really, to be honest with you. Mostly what I do is still life. I've made the grid with the thread and using it today for the first time. It will not reduce my ability to judge. No, not at all. You still have to do the work. Even if you've got a grid like this, you know, this is just, I'm working site size here. This is just a kind of, I've got this as an example to show you. I tend not to use the threads these days. But this is basically site size, although if you were working strictly site size with a cast drawing, instead of a little still life like this, you just have one thread going down and you judge all your measurements from that. It's just got a few more threads. It's exactly the same principle. Are the earlier webinars still available? Yeah, they're going to be up on YouTube forever. If you search for me on YouTube, this one will be up there once we stop doing it within, I don't know, half an hour or something, or maybe sooner. Look for Paul Foxton on YouTube and subscribe, because then anytime I do another one, you'll get a little notification that it's up. Okay, I think I'm really going to have to wrap things up now. It's about 11 o'clock for me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. Please do give it a go. And if you do, drop me a line, paul@learningtosee.co.uk, and let me know how you're getting on, and if I can help you along, I will. And watch out for the next webinar next week, when I'm going to try and do something a little bit more finished. Okay. Thanks very much for coming along, being nice, active in the chat, and giving me lots of interesting questions. I really hope you've learned something, and you've got something that you can take away with you that will help you when you're at the easel. Thanks very much.